We've hit the midway point of the season, which means it's time for mid-season grades for the Texas Longhorns coming into the bye week 5-1. It's midterm season for me here in college, so figured it's a good time to judge the Longhorns as well, kind of get me warmed up for them coming up next week here alongside Horns 24/7's Eric Henry. Eric, thanks for being here. We're going to go with a couple of groups as a whole to start, starting off with the Texas offense. I'm going to give them a B here. Number 13 in total offense amongst FBS teams, but they're number 65 in red zone offense and third down conversion percentages. Would love to see those numbers go up here towards the end of the season to give them a higher grade. But overall, I think B is pretty fair. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, Tommy, I land right there with you as far as a B is concerned. Here's the reason for me. As you mentioned, some of the red zone struggles, which have really gone back for the better part of a year and a half now, really caught up with the team during the Oklahoma game. And we saw that kind of come to roost and really cost the team what may have been, a real shot at the victory with those 4 tries from the goal line there. But just overall, Tommy, we haven't seen, outside of the Baylor game in my mind, we haven't seen this team, as far as offensively speaking, really fire on all cylinders, right? We've seen them kind of put together spurts, put together a quarter or in half, but we haven't seen an entire game outside of the Baylor game of this offense really firing on full cylinders. So in my mind, it's a B because obviously you can't, turn your nose down on 35 points a game. They're getting it done, but still, they're leaving opportunities on the field.
All right, so B to start for the Texas offense. Now the Texas defense, I'm going A- here. I think they have been very good so far this season. They have shown a lot of complete games. Number 28 in total defense, number 11 in third down defense. I think third down's really been where they've flexed their muscles all year this year. A little bit of a shaky end of the game against Oklahoma, but that's not enough for me to bump this team down anywhere towards the B range. I think Pete Kwiatkowski's group has done a pretty good job throughout the first 6 games of the season. Eric, your thoughts?
I landed an A, so I'm going to work backwards here, right? So we'll start with the Oklahoma game and the things that maybe, give you a little bit of concern. The defense against Dillon Gabriel obviously left a lot to be desired, right? And I think, Tommy, when we had a chance to talk with Jalen Ford and Jahdae Barron and some of the other guys defensively heading into the week, it seems if maybe now that they've had the experience of playing against Dillon Gabriel, they have a better feel for just how elusive and the type of playmaker he can be with his legs, right? I think the game plan, and listen, I wasn't in the meeting rooms during the week, but I think there was a bit of a sentiment just talking from some of the guys that they were going to look to focus on playing coverage, being able to, as far as the linebackers are concerned, being able to play a little more in coverage, not have to worry about spying a guy like they did against Alabama. So we saw that kind of hurt them in terms of, Dillon Gabriel having rush lanes or lanes to step up in the pocket and make some plays with his legs. But outside of that, the defense is, performed outstanding. The only other thing you could probably say is maybe you want a few more turnovers. They got out to a hot start, had 3 straight games with multiple turnovers, but weren't able to sustain that, down the stretch here. So you definitely want to see them getting back to creating takeaways, creating fumbles and things of that nature. But overall, I think A is where I land as far as Pete Kwiatkowski's defense.
All right, and the third phase of the game, the special teams unit left by Jeff Banks. Eric, I'm going B+ here. I think the reason I went a little bit lower on this one was because of the muff punts against Baylor. That certainly was something that raised my eyebrow a little bit. But ever since then, they've been very, very clean. And I think something that gets overlooked a lot with this Texas team is that Ryan Sanborn has been playing phenomenal football. The punter for the Longhorns, the Texas number 5 in net punt yards amongst FBS teams. They're number 18 in kickoff return defense and number 27 in punt returns, despite those 2 muffs. Eric, what would you grade the Longhorns special teams unit?
Yeah, Tommy, I also landed at a B+ as well. The area where I'd like to see them improve is in the kick return game. Head coach Steve Sarkisian talked about it during his Monday press conference in terms of wanting more out of that group when you have explosive playmakers like Keelan Robinson and even the punt return game like Xavier Worthy. Not so much the punt return game for me because we've seen a couple times where X is almost broken one loose, right, and taken it to the house. But in the kick return game, you want a little bit more. Got to give credit to Ryan Sanborn, piggyback off of what you said there. I mean, he's really done an excellent job as far as flipping the field, is one of the tops in the FBS as far as yards per punt. But something that, I think, Tommy, had Bert Auburn not rebounded against Oklahoma, I'd be a little bit more shaky, right? But with that being said, Bert Auburn put those, the missed kicks behind him, went 3 for 3 and nailed the 47-yarder that could have been the game winner. And unfortunately, we saw Oklahoma have that game-winning drive. So That's where I landed at B plus. I think there's definitely room for improvement in the kick return game, but all in all, a solid outing by Jeff Banks' group.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up the Burt Auburn case. That was another reason why previously in the weeks prior I had bumped them down a little bit more. But like you mentioned, exactly what you want to see from Auburn in a bounce back game, especially hitting that field goal towards the end, where maybe considering weeks past Texas fans him out there for a 47-yard field goal. But Steve Sarkisian showed his trust in his kicker. And speaking of the head coach, Steve Sarkisian is up next. I'm going with a B minus here. 5-1 is his best start as a head coach anywhere since his third season at Washington back in 2011. But I think some questionable decisions have been made as of late, and you can really look back to the Oklahoma game when it comes to the play calling on 1st and goal from the 1 from there, and then maybe playing a little bit of up tempo when you could have just drained the clock, run the clock down, and had a game-winning field goal against Oklahoma. So those two things from last week bump Steve Sarkisian down a little bit for me, but overall, I think a pretty solid season from Sark in year 3. Eric?
Yeah, Tommy, in terms of Steve Sarkisian with the Red River Shootout, it certainly holds a lot of weight, right? So for those of you out there maybe bumping him down a bit, you don't want to, poo-poo on a 5-0 start, but when you lose that rivalry game, it certainly holds some weight. I come in at a B. I like you mentioned, the play calling there. Steve Sarkisian even said it himself that he's kind of kicking himself. Maybe he was a little bit stubborn on that. The 4 tries on it from the goal line. Running the first down play, coming back to it on 3rd down. Felt like he could have done a better job. In my mind, where I think maybe you have some other rooms for question in terms of the way things kind of shook out early in the season, in terms of the slow starts and things of that nature. But all in all, I think Steve Sarkisian's doing a solid job. Just maybe a couple things here. I mean, you can even look at, CJ Baxter, right? He was named the starting running back out of camp. And I guess to an extent, and we'll talk about this guy a little bit later on, no one could have predicted how good Jonathan Brooks would be. But that's something in itself that maybe if you start JB early on, maybe you don't have some of those early struggles against Rice. But yeah, I land at a B. I think he's doing a solid job, but certainly as any coach would grade themselves, certainly room for improvement.
You brought up Jonathan Brooks because he's the first player that we'll be grading. We'll go 3 players on the Texas offense, 3 players on the Texas defense. So JB up first. I'm giving him an A+. I think he at mid-season form is one of the best, if not the best, running back in the country. I think you can certainly make a case for him. Through 6 weeks of football, he leads all Power 5 teams in rushing yards, 108 carries for 726 yards, 6 touchdowns. That's good for 6.7 yards per carry. This has been the pleasant surprise that the Texas offense needed. We all questioned coming into the season whether or not the ground game would look the same with Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson going pro. Jonathan Brooks has picked up right where they left off, and he's looking great. Eric?
Tommy, I'm just going to add to what you laid out there, and I give him an A+ grade. Where I think you have to be most impressed is the amount of forced missed tackles. Bijan Robinson, Roschon Johnson combined for 150 missed tackles. That far and away led FBS football last year. Jonathan Brooks, had he started every game, you can make the argument, if you look at the amount of missed tackles he's forcing per game, that he would be leading FBS. The leader right now has 44 missed tackles forced. JB has 37. And that, of course, he was without getting the lion's share of carries the first 2 games. So he has picked up where Bijan and Roschon have left off. And I think another thing, Tommy, is how explosive he's been. That's the thing that maybe some people, when you look at a CJ Baxter, it's easy to fall in love with him because clearly you look at CJ and you look at Bijan and you say, okay, yeah, I can see the link there. CJ definitely looks in terms of an explosive nature like the next Bijan Robinson. But JB is just so smooth and makes it look so easy, but he's doing very similar things to what Bijan Robinson did during his time at Oklahoma. Time at Texas.
Oh boy, Eric, you might catch some heat in the comments for that one, but we'll let it slide. Moving on.
Stuck in that rivalry game, Tommy. You are right about that.
Hey, it's all good. It's hard to get out of your mind, especially with a bye week. Next up, we're going with Xavier Worthy, sticking with the Texas offense. I'm going with an A+ here. Eric, the reason I went with an A+ was partially because of the article that you put out, which, by the way, if you haven't read it, make sure you go to horns247.com and read Eric's piece on Xavier Worthy's efficiency this year. I think it's a really phenomenal piece, and it tells a lot about how his role kind of changed from last year, where he was the main guy and the guy that Steve Sarkisian wanted to go to almost every play. And with a broken hand, you certainly can't do that. This year, he's back healthy, and he's helping when he has the ball in his hands. and when he's running away from the ball because it takes attention away defensively. So far this season, 34 receptions for 453 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's 13.3 yards per reception. So X-Man gets an A+ from me. Eric, your thoughts?
I land with a solid A for X. The only reason I don't go above and give him the A+ is you want to see a few more of the big plays, right? Like he takes the screen pass against Wyoming, takes it to the house. And Grant, that's just been a matter of opportunities. When you take a look, and I appreciate you shouting out the article that I wrote there, his efficiency is just so much better than it was last year, as catching 77% of the targets that are thrown to him. That's far and away amongst some of the top receivers in FBS football, and where you want a true number one receiver to be in comparison to last year, where you talk about the broken hand playing a factor, but also he just wasn't the amount of targets in relation to the amount of catches just wasn't there. I mean, he had 113 targets and only caught 52% of those, right? So I just think the way the offense is catered to share the ball, share the wealth, maybe that's taking away from some of X's opportunities. But all in all, I think especially these last few weeks, Tommy, he's had his most efficient football. Is probably playing his best football of his Longhorn career.
And speaking of efficiency, how about the next guy we'll talk about, especially the last couple of weeks? Quinn Ewers has been showing it off. His highest completion percentage against Oklahoma at 84% in his career. For the season, 128 of 184. That's good for 69.6%, which is a huge jump from last year. 1,704 yards, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. And how about this? 5 rushing touchdowns. I would not have guessed that coming into the season through the midway point of the year. Eric, he gets a B from me. I think that, it was a very impressive the first couple of games where he went without throwing an interception. The first 2 drives against Oklahoma, really some questionable throws that make you raise your eyebrow a little bit. But overall, I think Quinn Ewers has made a jump, and he's doing his job, which is distributing the ball to his playmakers. That's what he needed to do in order to get those numbers, and that's what the Texas offense needed to do to get success. I think he's been doing a pretty good job of that so far.
You and I land at the same spot, Tommy. I am at a B with Quinn Ewers. If you take a look at the numbers themselves on the surface, you're probably thinking, man, that's a guy who probably should be around to A-. But, those of us who've seen the games know there have been some struggles offensively. But all in all, I think you can't devalue Quinn protecting the football. Of course, he had the two interceptions against Oklahoma, and that's a little bit disappointing. But all in all, he's done a very good job protecting the football. And that's something that, I don't think you can devalue, because I know I wondered coming into this season, could he replicate how good of a job he did in protecting the football from last year? And another thing, those rushing touchdowns, they count for something, right? Quinn's talked about the fact that him dropping the pounds from last year, maybe he's played a factor in the fact that he wouldn't have been able to escape for those touchdown runs or convert those first downs on a couple third down conversions he's had. So definitely want to take that into account to his game. And another thing, Tommy, the last thing I'll say that can't be ignored as well is just his overall passer rating, his passer efficiency. He's higher. I haven't checked it after the Oklahoma game, but entering the Oklahoma game, he was higher than guys like Stetson Bennett and where they were last year. So if he just does his job and distributes the ball to the playmakers, he's doing a great job at quarterback, and I think he landed a solid B. Certainly room for improvement, but you can't, come down too hard on what Quinn's done this year.
All right, let's go ahead and flip over to the defense now. We'll go 3 more players and then get you out of here. Starting with Jaylan Ford, the captain of this defense, 40 tackles, 2 interceptions this season. I'm giving him an A-. I think he coming in as the Big 12 Defensive Preseason Player of the Year. A lot of expectations for him. He's the leader of this defense that has played so well. I think so far he's lived up to a lot of those expectations. Certainly didn't have his best game against Oklahoma, but nonetheless, he's been the driving force for this defense. I think a lot of credit goes to him for this. So A- is where I sit with Jaylan Ford.
Tommy, I'm at a B+, and here's the thing that I'd look at as far as Jaylen's concerned. You can't get too caught up in the counting stats, because the fact of the matter is this: Texas has had a couple of ball games this year. You look at the Rice game, you look at the Baylor game, where quite frankly, those games were decided, very much by the third quarter. And Jaylen probably didn't get a chance to rack up some of those, 10, 12, 13 tackle games that maybe he would have last year. But overall, his ability in coverage, leading the team with 2 turnovers, certainly doing 2 interceptions, certainly doing a good job there as well, and still making plays at the line of scrimmage. So I think Jaylan Ford is having a solid year overall. Again, room for improvement, but I land at a B+.
All right, and then up front on the defensive line, next up, we're going with the big fella, Tavondre Sweat. We kind of talked about Tavondre Sweat towards the start of the season. He and Alfred Collins kind of little maybe make or break years for him. Tavondre Sweat has played a lot since he got to Texas and has played fairly well, but you want to see a little bit more from him this season. He got a little more snaps now that he's the starting guy and he's not sitting behind anybody like Moro Ojimo and Keandre Coburn last year. He comes in this year, and I think he's been dominant. The leading force up the middle against the pass and the run, especially 18 tackles. He's got a pass deflection and a sack this year. I'm giving the big fella an A+. I think he has done a phenomenal job leading the Texas defensive line. I think he's the anchor up front, and he's a big reason why Texas's defense has had so much success. Eric, your thoughts?
Tommy, you and I land at the same spot. Hey, listen, you and I could probably talk for 10 minutes as far as Tavondre, or we could just put on a 15-second clip of him, pushing the opposing offensive lineman 3, 4, 5 yards back into the backfield, right? I mean, Tavondre is really making the most of this year. Such an athletic guy for his size. And yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why you almost have to kind of pull back a little bit for me on Jalen's grade is because, Tavondre and those guys up front are making his life very easy. Not that Jalen's not making plays as well, but you got to show some love to those big defensive tackles up front. And everything starts, in my mind, with Tavondre Sweat.
All right, Eric. One thing I've learned from this is that I think we'd make some pretty good professors, but that's high above my pay grade. So we'll see if we get a job offer anytime soon. But we do enjoy Horns 24/7, so we don't plan to go anywhere. Last guy that we'll grade here, sticking with the defense, Jalen Catalon. 15 tackles and a forced fumble this year. Steve Sarkisian said he wasn't on a pitch count, but he hasn't gotten a lot of snaps this year. And with the snaps that he's gotten, I would be lying, I think, if I would say that I expected a little bit more. So I'm going with a C+ here for Jalen Catalon. Not lower because we haven't seen enough of him yet, but not higher because with the snaps that he's gotten, I just think I would like to see a little bit more when you look back at his time at Arkansas when he was an all-SEC player. That's the kind of guy that I think Texas wanted in the secondary. Now, granted, high rotation may take some snaps away from him and seeing that, but with the snaps that he's gotten, leaves a little bit more for desire. Eric, do you agree, or am I a little far-fetched there?
No, I landed a C+ also, Tommy. Here's the reason why. I think all the points you made there are solid. If you go back and look at Jalen Catalon from his time at Arkansas, he was pretty much a reasonably good to above average or great in coverage in terms of playing safety, right? This year, it's been a bit of a weakness. And I think, listen, maybe part of that comes with, as you talked about, reduced snaps and maybe the situations that he's put in, because as you mentioned, there is a rotation, whether it's Derek Williams, Michael Taft, Jaron Thompson, Keaton Crawford. A lot of guys are getting snaps at the safety position, right? So maybe that plays a part in it. But overall, Jalen Catalon, he had the big hit against Jason Bean, forced to fumble. Of course, that fluky thing where they recover and take it for a touchdown. But all in all, I mean, you see the glimpses of the player he was at Arkansas in run support, but I just want to see more out of him in coverage. And I do think whether it is a pitch count or it's just maybe it's situational, we don't know. But I do think down the stretch for this Texas defense to go to even greater heights, they're going to need just a little bit more of that guy that was the all SEC first team performer at Arkansas. So I landed a C+.
All right. Well, the midterm exam is over for the Texas Longhorns. I think we were pretty fair there, Eric. 5-1. It's hard to grade a lot of these guys toughly, but nonetheless, I think we were pretty honest. So let us know what your grades would be in the comments section below. And thanks so much for watching us here on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when new content heads your way. For Eric, Henry, and the rest of the crew, I'm Tommy Yarrish. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.